Is the microphone working okay? Great, okay. I'm sorry that I have to begin by mentioning, as many of you will know, that there was an unfortunate cyclist death at the King's Road roundabout in Portobello recently. So a crowdfunder has been set up for the family of the victim. So if you go online, you'll probably be able to find, if you'd like to read a bit about it and support the family, you can find that online. We have now got a Spokes Portobello subgroup, and they are going to be contacting the council to try and get a review of traffic arrangements in the area around that particular roundabout. As we know, roundabouts are particularly dangerous places for cyclists. So I would like to start by thanking Edinburgh University Department of Social Responsibility and Sustainability for providing the premises, the tea and biscuits, and you couldn't believe the amount of arrangements that have gone on beforehand. So Dave and Sarah, thank you very much. Secondly, a big thank you to the Spokes team. There's at least 10 people involved, and I'm not going to name them all, but particular thanks to Martin, the overall organizer. If you're tweeting about the meeting tonight, use the hashtag SpokesMTG. The meeting is being live streamed, and that's on our YouTube channel. And both that video and the speaker's slides tonight will be on our website in the next few days. I'd also like to give a big welcome to the Inverness Velocity Cycle Community Cafe, because they're actually having a meeting tonight where they're live streaming our meeting into the cafe. So they've also got the advantage of some excellent cakes, which I'm afraid you can't sample those unless you have a quick trip up to Inverness. Right, so we decided on this topic last autumn because we knew that at this point in time the climate bill would be going through the Scottish Parliament. And you'll probably hear a bit about that from Claudia and Caroline. But our choice of topic was reinforced in December at the UN Climate Conference when David Attenborough made this really quite remarkable statement for someone who's generally regarded as a fairly mild-mannered person, I think, showing that climate breakdown is not really an inappropriate word to be considering. But little did we realize when we set up our meeting that just a week before, hundreds of thousands of children across the world would be going on climate strike in over 100 countries. 50,000 in the UK and between 2,000 and 3,000 in Edinburgh. Hugely inspiring, hugely intelligent. These are some of the slogans that I got off some of the many, many banners. And if there was an argument for reducing the voting age, I can't think of a better one than this. However, not only, there was something else that we didn't know was going to happen, and that's a very sad occurrence. As you probably know, there's been another horrific climate disaster in the last few days. Wind speeds, floods, and deaths, all probably on a scale paralleling Hurricane Katrina in East Africa, of course, and I'm sure all our thoughts will be with those affected. So the topic of the meeting, climate, transport, cycling, that brings out three relationships: climate and transport, climate and cycling and transport. By way of introduction to the meeting, what I'm going to do is just pick out one point from each of these three relationships. So first of all, climate and transport. This is part of the lead article in the new Spokes Bulletin. You may well have one. You can pick one up at the Spokes stall, or you can see it on our website. You're not expected to read it all just now, but it's widely known that transport has now become the greatest source of climate emissions in Scotland and indeed in the UK. But what is much less well known is the Scottish Government's own predictions for what's going to happen to road traffic over the next 20 years on the basis of their current policies. For example, car trips are going to rise by 25%. Miles driven are going to rise by 37%. There's a separate document covering predictions on air travel. That's going to increase by even more than these predictions for road travel. And if the Scottish Government gets its way in abolishing air passenger duty, then even those figures are going to be at higher. So these figures basically show the critical importance of the relationship between transport and climate in the immediate future and in years to come. So the relationship between climate and cycling. Well, the value of one person changing from car to bike for their everyday journeys is pretty obvious. But what is not so clear is the scale. If that happened on a very wide basis, what would be the overall impact on emissions? I've tried to do a bit of research finding out if there has been any detailed research on this. And I think it'd be a great topic for one of your students, possibly, because I've only found 2 pieces of research. They did look both pretty detailed. And those are some facts that I got from those pieces of research. So they do suggest that if we saw a widespread move across the world, particularly in cities and towns, it could have quite a significant impact on climate emissions in total. Now, the relationship between cycling and transport. There is a tendency to see cycling in a bit of a silo rather than looking at wider transport implications and the wider transport context. We in Spokes, we rightly argue for more cash for cycling, better infrastructure for cycling, but do we pay enough attention to the impact of wider transport, and particularly the impact of road expansion on conditions for cycling? The government is particularly prone to this silo mentality. They don't understand why, when they're putting more money and more effort into cycling, why aren't the figures going up? Why is cycling staying static? And incidentally, although it's staying static across Scotland as a whole, we know it is increasing in some areas. For example, central Edinburgh and central Glasgow. So that implies, obviously, that there are many parts of Scotland in which it's actually falling. So the problem, at the same time as putting money into cycling, much, much greater sums are going into expanding the main road system. And this has consequences for the cycling environment, consequences which are both direct and indirect. For example, because it's easy to drive further, to drive faster, therefore facilities get spread out further. Homes are further from workplaces, further from shops, further from friends and such like. So journeys which in the past could easily have been made by bike become much more difficult to cycle or often become impossible. Similarly, roads, particularly outside the cities, outside the city centres, become more hostile for cycling. Also, if more cash goes into road expansion, there's less cash for rail, for bus, for walking, for cycling. And that again makes the attractiveness of these alternative modes less. So the lesson here is putting more cash into cycling is great and something we need to keep arguing for. But it must be accompanied by wider transport and planning policies which work together towards sustainability objectives rather than working in conflicts. Now, we've got 4 excellent speakers tonight to talk on different aspects of the subject. Claudia Beamish, let's get the names up here. Claudia Beamish, who is the co-convener of the Scottish Parliament cross-party group on cycling, walking and buses, and is also the Labour spokesperson for environment and climate. She'll be followed by Alex Luetchford from the 2050 Climate Group. He's the co-chair of their policy subgroup. We had asked him to talk about the young person's perspective, but in view of the children's climate strikes, I'm going to ask him to talk about the not quite so young person's perspectives. Then Dave Gorman, who I've mentioned already, who's kindly provided us with this fantastic meeting opportunity, who is the head of Edinburgh University Department of Social Responsibility and Sustainability. Finally, Carolyn Rance, the climate campaigner from Friends of the Earth, who will be talking about the climate bill and various other issues. I've asked them very definitely to keep to 10 minutes, as I've tried to do myself. I'm not quite sure if I've succeeded. And that's to leave an hour for a full question and answer session and panel discussion. That's going to be chaired by Elizabeth Blomberg, who is Professor of Environmental Politics at Edinburgh University. And even more important than that, she is a spokesmember. So without more ado, I shall pass over to Claudia. If you press that one, it'll go on to your first slide. Okay. Move it away from mute. Oops, that should be it, I think.
Okay. Great. I was going to ask where the microphone is. I'm not very good at tech, am I? It's here. But anyway, although I'm not a young person, as you can see, I hope I still stay young at heart, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what Alex is going to say. And I'm very excited that this weekend I'm going down to see my grandson, Maka, in Tynemouth, and he is terribly excited about getting the stabilizers off his bike. So start him young, I say. New research on climate change, there we are, is really, really significant and moving beyond the Paris Agreement. And I know everyone will know this, but I just want to set a quick context to things. Now that the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change shows it is absolutely vital that we limit the rise to 1.5 or indeed below that. And you can see up there what 1.5 versus 2 degrees Celsius means. Several 100 million fewer people exposed to climate-related poverty, the proportion of the global population under water stress to be 50% lower, and a projected decline of at least 70% of all coral reefs, shocking enough in itself, of course, rather than a total loss. So, stark figures indeed. Currently, as you won't be able to see there, but you can now, currently the Eclair Committee, which I'm afraid isn't a cake either, they're all in Inverness tonight, has just released its Stage 1 report. I'm a member of that. It's cross-party, of course, in the Parliament, and it will be debated in the Chamber hot off the press. It's the Tuesday after next, if anyone can come and show how important that debate is. I hope you'll agree with me. It's Tuesday of the week after next in the Parliament. And Scottish Government's proposed bill does not include, in my view, nearly enough ambition and leaves room for improvement. And Scottish Labour is determined to put in amendments to, you can see up there, to set a target for Scotland to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 at the latest. And I felt really proud of this when I managed to get it through Shadow Cabinet. However, when I went to meet young Friends of the Earth in Glasgow in a cafe, they told me that that really wasn't good enough and it was 2040. And I know that now young people are calling, and Alex will tell you about that, I think by 2025, a lot of them are. So we really have so much to do. And if you think just about the example of those coral reefs, you know, we could do even more than what we would do if it was net zero by 2050. And along with a target of 77% emissions reduction by 2030, demanding urgent action for intergenerational justice as well, and of course for the global south. And that has been stressed how important it is, and we all know that we have to start now rather than leave it till later. And that should all be accompanied, in my view, and indeed the Greens view as well, by statutory, long-term, well-funded and independent Just Transition Commission, because we can't leave people behind like we did when Margaret Thatcher shut down the mines. And I'm not going to say any more about that because I'm going to try and stick to my time. Transport and climate change, you can see the figures up there, you all know them, but if you want to just look at them, it is very stark. It is one of the three heaviest emitters, transport, and it's reduced by 2.5. You can see the dates, but now it's increased between 2015 and 2016 by 2.3. Shameful, and that really is just not acceptable. And there's a lot that needs to happen. You can see on, I won't read it all out, but you can see the other, I hope you can at the back, the graph there as well. So we go on to Scottish Government cycling targets. And Scottish Government target, as you know, is to achieve 10% everyday journeys by bike by 2020. And progress is very slow so far. And 2018 stats show only 2% of journeys were by bike compared to 52% by car. And you can see that graph again. There are European leaders, and Amsterdam is one of them. You'll probably all have, many of you, I hope, have been to different places where the cycling is a lot happier in cities, and indeed in rural environments. And Amsterdam is home to an estimated 8,470 bikes, and that's nearly two to the government, who launched the idea from there. And to give Derek Mackay credit, when he was the transport minister, he said that that he was happy to do it and to give all parties credit. So we can all work together, and I think that's really important. We also worked together on the climate change report at stage 1, and it may not have gone quite as far as I would have liked, or Mark Ruskell would have liked, who's on the committee with me from the Greens, but we've got a consensual view that the dangers are so great that we must work very fast. So I think that was worth it. Doesn't stop us as political parties pushing further. So the CPG on cycling, as I say, proposed this an infrastructure project award, and it's now in its second year, the Community Links Plus, and it was very exciting that Glasgow won the first one, and you can see the figures up there. I won't read them out, but the South City Way. And what's equally important is that it's a very inclusive project. It goes from the Gorbals to the Merchant City, and there's the hub on Victoria Road, the bike hub, where people can hire a bike for £3 a year. And I think it is very important for us to recognise that cycling needs to be more inclusive, and it is very expensive to buy a bike, you know. So in terms of accessibility, it's quite hard, quite challenging. The figures you can see up there, I won't read them out, but in terms of women and cycling and as opposed to men, and this was actually a bike bells, is it called? Bells for bikes, or in the Borders that I went to a couple of years ago and learnt how to change the tyre, the inner tube of the tyre and all that, which I didn't know till then, shamefully. But anyway, those of us who were on that, you can see Alison Johnson in that picture as well, and the wonderful Brenda from who fights with her husband, it's Rod Mitchell, isn't it, for the presumed liability. So we learnt how to do it, and I haven't had a puncture since, so I probably won't remember now, but never mind. I do think it's important that we empower ourselves to know what we're doing. So, pretty well finally, I'm probably running out of time. The transport bill is coming up, and Dave, you made the point about the different forms of transport, and I think it's very important that public transport is better for us, and not least, it would be nice to be able to get a bike on a train and a bus indeed, but the new trains aren't particularly good on that. But you'll see that Colin Smith, my friend and colleague, is leading for Labour on such areas as defining the strengthening of low emission zones and air pollution levels, and enabling competitive municipal bus companies, and strengthening smart ticketing. And then today, this morning, I was in the REC committee. It's not my committee, but Mark Ruskell was taking through the 20's Plenty, which I think is very significant for emissions and climate, and for those of us who cycle as well, and just for having better living streets. And I think, I was going to say he deserves a round of applause for what he did, but he had to sit there for an hour and a half and answer questions from the whole committee, and I very much hope that his bill will pass, and I'm very supportive of that. Sorry, I didn't go on to that one. Not very good at this. So, as I've said as a final comment, there are a wide range of further ways forward in bike and climate action and transport action as well. Bike driver education, not least on-road cycling education for kids, not just my grandson, and presumed liability for safety, which I'm supportive of, and so much more. So I'm very, very interested to hear what Alex and the other speakers are going to say, and I'm here to learn as well. And I'm sorry that I won't be able to stay for more than half an hour of the panel, but I'm just not feeling that great. So anyway, I'm here. Thank you very much. Shall I go down the other way? I'll get from the pictures. You probably couldn't see them, could
you? Can you hear me? Okay, sounds like it. Okay, I'm going to try and stick to 10 minutes, but I've got a lot to fit in, so excuse me if I speak fast. Thanks to Spokes for inviting me to speak. I've been asked to provide, I hope not tokenistically, a young person's perspective on the issues of transport and climate change. So I thought I'd start by introducing myself a little to provide some context on where that perspective comes from. So firstly, I am a young person who cycles every day for both transport and fitness. I'm a volunteer with 2050 Climate Group, which I'll come on to talk about. And I'm also, my day job is also in active travel. I work at Edinburgh College Students Association, where I try to promote sustainable transport. So my perspective comes from a mixture of my everyday experiences, my interest as an active travel policy nerd, and also as someone who 5 days a week tries to convince, with some success, other young people that cycling is great. I should also point out from the start that the usual caveats about these being my own views and not my employer's or 2050 applies. As I said, I'm here because of my role in 2050 Climate Group. We are a charity that aims to educate, engage, and empower young people to take action on climate change. Primarily, we do this through our Young Leaders Development Programme, which every year takes over 100 young people through 6 modules of leadership and climate change education, with the aim of creating a whole new generation of leaders who have the skills and knowledge we need to tackle this thing. We had our final module last Saturday, and it was really, really great, basically, to be in a room with so many other young people who are passionate about it, and it really, really is fantastically motivating. We have 60 volunteers, there's only 1 professional staff member, so it really is like young people driven. We also work towards our aims through some other ways, as well as the Young Leaders Development Programme. I am co-chair of the policy subgroup, and our basic aim is to get young people engaged in policy decision making. We mostly do this by responding to government consultations, and I'll come on to talk about our response to the transport bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment. But we've expanded our work a lot in the past year. Siri is one of our volunteers, and she was invited to speak alongside Caroline at the Parliamentary Committee on environment, climate change, land reform. It's a long word. Basically about our response to the climate change bill when we submitted to the consultation. We also recently hosted our first event as a policy subgroup, and that was a discussion all about Brexit, which was really fantastic. The event, not the topic. I thought I'd also provide a bit of context in terms of the stats and issues around young people's transport. As you can see, our generation is driving much less than previous generations did when they were our age. All the slides have messed up a little bit, but okay. We basically, if you look at current transport trends, we are driving less than older people, and we also use public transport more than older people. In terms of cycling, it definitely trends towards younger people, although the peak for cycling is 30 to 39-year-olds, and I wonder how many of those are just mammals. So with that in mind, here's a few young person-specific issues in transport. One problem, basically, is a lack of decent travel discounts for young people. You can get a discount on the bus if you're 16 to 18 and have a Young Scot card, but that's more or less it in terms of buses. The Lothian Buses student rider card is okay, but for students at Edinburgh College, it's not actually that good value because most of them only study 2 or 3 days a week, and it basically works out the same price as a day ticket. And there's also obviously the young person's rail card, but if you're travelling at peak times, there's a £12 minimum fare. So if you're commuting from anywhere kind of nearish to Edinburgh, you're paying full price. Another issue on terms of buses, which is, and travel generally, which is a bit more specific to Edinburgh College, is that students can get a travel bursary, but it's based on the cheapest form of transport, which is usually a monthly bus pass. So that basically means that the best, most sustainable, quickest routes can be financially inaccessible. So if you, for example, live in Galashiels and you want to get the train to our Milton Road campus, it takes 48 minutes, but your travel bursary won't cover the cost of the train ticket, so you're stuck on a 2-hour bus. Air pollution is also another issue which affects young people. Children are especially vulnerable to air pollution and the ill health caused by it. Developing lungs obviously take on more damage, and the tailpipes of cars are essentially just at mouth height of a child. 1/3 of children in the UK live in an area which is unsafe for air pollution, and over 1/4 of children drive to school, or are driven to school, obviously. So, as I said, at 2050 Climate Group, we try to get young people engaged in the political decision-making that can affect issues like those I've just outlined. One example of this was our response to the Transport Scotland Bill. It's worth mentioning that as an organisation, 2050 tries to avoid adopting specific policy positions, so our responses usually present the views of young people who contributed to the surveys and workshops we run, rather than what we specifically as a charity advocate for. So our response covered a lot of issues contained within the bill, but I'll highlight 3 key ones. Firstly, we want the government to introduce low emission zones, but it should be more specific targets and timescales than are currently included in the bill for vehicle emissions reductions. The low emission zones should focus on high emission vehicles and private cars, but it should be part of a whole systemic approach. It should be seen as like a kind of one tool alongside others, such as active travel infrastructure, with the aim being to reduce car usage overall. Another key ask was for more measures that increase and improve public transport, for reasons I've kind of just talked about. The respondents to the surveys we ran were very supportive of the idea of giving councils more powers to directly run bus services, and many people talked about loaning buses as an example to be followed. And generally, the young people we talked to were very sceptical of the franchising model. It was really strongly felt that public bus services should be just that, a public service for local communities. It shouldn't be run for the profits of shareholders. Another related issue is smart ticketing, which is included in the bill, but it doesn't really go very far. It's basically just kind of like it sets a national technological standard when it could be so much more ambitious. Other countries are looking into, having nationwide smart ticketing systems where you'd have one card which covers your train, bike share, buses, basically all forms of transport for the entire country. So Scotland should really be trying to make it as easy as it can be to use public transport, and so having one ticket for all systems would help with that. Finally, our response was highly supportive of the proposals to ban pavement parking. But we were concerned that it wouldn't be enforced. We called for the government to have a bigger focus on reducing car usage in city centres generally. We thought that the reclaimed space could be used for all sorts of things. I mean, there's millions of things you could use a parking space for, which is more effective and better for a community than just sitting a car there. Active travel, public transport, car sharing, electric vehicle charging points, community green spaces, the list is endless. I mentioned at the start our Young Leaders Development Programme, which is kind of the main focus of what we as an organisation do. And I wanted to talk about an example from one of our participants who used the programme to try and improve active travel in her area. The main aim of the YLDP, as we call it, is to enable participants to take action. And so this year, Heather decided she wanted to improve cycling along the A71. Heather commutes from East Calder to Heriot Watt. It should really be a simple 6-mile bike ride, but obviously, as always, poor infrastructure is a barrier. So she contacted councillors and various third sector organisations, including Spokes, and research various funding opportunities. And this was in partnership with other people as part of the programme as well. Sustrans arranged a site visit, but eventually transpired that the path is actually too narrow. So there is the A71 has a footpath which runs alongside it. Actually, I've got a map. So the A71 has a footpath which runs alongside it, but it's not officially designated as a cycle path. But lots of people still use it because it's safer than cycling on the road. But surfacing's pretty poor in places. There's lots of vegetation overgrowth. Peter from Spokes has been in the news because of his efforts to try and clear it. So that's how Heather found about his efforts. 1 second, sorry. Yeah, so I think this, unfortunately, yeah, as I said, Sustrans decided that the path was too narrow to take funding any further. And I think it's exemplary of the kind of barriers which people face when they're trying, when we're trying to get more people cycling. So, you know, the path which exists already is fine-ish, but could be so much better. And it's pretty dangerous in wet weather because of the lack of proper surfacing. There are buses Heather could take, but they cost about £4 each way. There are 2 kind of officially designated cycle routes she could take, the NCN 75 or the NCN 754. But the one, if you're going along the canal, it's a massive detour. Oh yeah, okay. So if you're going along the canal, then obviously that's a massive detour out of the way, so that adds about 2 or 3 miles onto her journey. And the NCN 75 actually uses some pretty busy roads. It's not really up to standard, which I'm quite glad Sustrans has recognised in their recent report, but there is a lot of work to be done in improving their national cycle network. Oh, I seem to be running right over. So I'm going to quickly jump through this. I was asked to mention other movements of young people in climate change campaigning. There's obviously Extinction Rebellion and the school strike movement. I think these are both very impressive organisations in terms of how they've managed to shift the conversation and the national attention to climate change in recent months. But personally, I see direct action as just kind of one side of a coin. We should be trying to influence policy and politicians from within and outside the political decision-making system. And 2050 very much focuses on the former, but we definitely recognise and encourage the latter. You know, it's not that we're saying that these people are wasting their time, because ultimately, you need both to kind of change the conversation. And definitely, I'm much more open to direct action in the last few years than I would have been a few years ago, given the urgency of the situation. So, some kind of reflections to sum up. I've been working in active travel public engagement for the past 2 years now, and it's given me plenty of thoughts about these issues. Firstly, most people, even if they do care about climate change, have higher priorities. Edinburgh College, many of our students are from highly deprived backgrounds, and they have so many higher priorities in sustainability. And they just turn off whenever you mention the environment. In Copenhagen, which is obviously a fantastic cycling city, people cycle because it's convenient, fast, and healthy. And so we should be trying to break down those barriers, rather than just running bike breakfasts and lead rides, which are great, but it's never going to work at scale. You know, we need to be focusing on public investment in infrastructure. As has been mentioned, we are running out of time. I won't talk about the details of the UN report, but it basically means that we need rapid action now. And not only that, I want to talk, as a young person, I want to talk about kind of the generational injustice of all of this, because we are not the ones who have caused all the pollution and carbon emissions which is causing climate change. As I talked about, us as young people currently, we're driving less, we're using public transport more, we're cycling more, we're eating less meat. And it's us and people in the future who are going to have to pay for all the car driving of older people. As a final point, one thing that has amazed me in the kind of 2 years I've been doing working in this sector is how quickly my perspective changed. Basically, very quickly, I realized the problem was cars, and I started hating them. There are so many costs associated to their use, financial and otherwise, and so many benefits to active travel, which we all know. But everywhere I look, I see cities and cultures which are kind of just entirely built around cars. And so there's a simple solution, which is we ban cars. It's so simple. It's mind-bogglingly simple. We just get rid of cars. But it's never going to work, because the culture is just so built around the car. It's like everyone I talk to at Edinburgh College in my job, 90% of them, they can't conceive of it. They think a car is a necessity, despite the fact most of them live less than 3 miles away from their college. And yeah, but in my experience, I cycle every day, I don't have a car, I can't ever foresee having a car if I live in Edinburgh. And it's relatively easy to do for most people. And even with adaptive bikes, even if you've got a disability, you can still cycle. And so, yeah, it's a relatively easy thing to do. But given our current situation, I think it's also the moral thing to do. Thank you. That's me.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Is that working? Good. And hello, is it Inverness? Shout out to Inverness. Warm welcome to Edinburgh University. Can I echo what Dave was saying earlier? It's very nice to host these events. It actually proved quite a challenging one because we hadn't realised a bunch of young people would be outside, which we also think is great. But originally you were going to have your tea and coffee where they were standing. So we had some issues, but we got there. So warm welcome. It's vernal equinox, spring equinox today. Which is always a good sign for a meeting. I think it's also World Happiness Day, which is maybe in the context of what we're talking about. I'm not so sure we should be happy. It's also a number of other days. It's National Set Fire to a Snowman Day, apparently. And it's World Ravioli Day as well, by the way. Let's see if So I've only got 10 minutes as well. Transport and climate is what I want to talk about. But of course, I am going to talk about that, but I'm going to set the context what Edinburgh does on social responsibility and sustainability for a few minutes too. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what we're doing on land-based transport, and then I want to finish on talking about why, in fact, we need to think about flights as a university as well. So my name's Dave Gorman, Director of Social Responsibility and Sustainability. In case you want to know, yes, I have met the comedian. Yes, he is a very funny guy. For those of you who know what that is. So we have a strategic plan called Delivering Impact for Society. We're reviewing it at the minute, but that's unusual for university. So this is already saying the university is about more than teaching and research and knowledge creation. It's for a purpose. It's for a public good. And the sentence which I always want to keep in every new revision of the strategic plan is, as a truly global university rooted in Scotland's capital city, we will make a significant, sustainable and socially responsible contribution to the world. And I try and hold the university to that. That's why I'm here. I was head of strategy at SEPA for many years. I came to the university because they persuaded me that this is something that they take seriously. And you can maybe in questions and answers tell me whether you agree. We define social responsibility and sustainability as a self-imposed duty, a kind of moral duty to try and do the right thing and do some public good. So I'm going to talk about climate and energy, which is one of the little circles here that you can see. We're also very interested in resources and in the circular economy. Talk about that later if you want. We also take very seriously, we are a large institution now, $1 billion a year turnover. We have 700 buildings. We have 40,000 students, 13,000 staff. We have students from almost every country in the world, except 6. We also spend $350 million a year on goods and services. And we're globally recognized university with a global reputation. So that gives you the opportunity to make changes. So we take very seriously sustainable procurement. We're a fair trade university. But questions about supply chains, questions about fairness, about human rights violations, about child labor, conflict minerals, modern slavery. There are more slaves in the world now than there have ever been in human history, if you include bonded labor. So we take these issues seriously and we try and do what we can. We also take them seriously in terms of investments. So we have £1 billion a year of assets under management, which makes us the 3rd largest manager of assets in universities after Oxford and Cambridge. For those of you who've been around for a while, you remember the protests in 2015 about divestments, which was one of the things I was involved in at the time. So we know that our staff and our students take these issues very seriously, and we need to embed them in research and teaching. And we also are very interested in what we can give back to the community. So we run a community grant scheme, for example, and we've handed out 150,000 over the last 18 months to community groups that we think deserve it. So a bigger picture in which we try and set this context, but I'm probably already running out of time. So we have 3 targets on our climate strategy. The first 2 are not as strong as they might be. One is about reducing the relative carbon intensity of the money we spend. and we're trying to halve that, and we're making good progress on that. But that only really means that we're dying less slowly, if you like. Relative cuts don't matter in the bigger picture. They're important for measuring how we're doing at a policy level within the university, but we need to make absolute cuts. We're trying to return our emissions to where they were in 2007-8 by 2025. Doesn't sound very challenging, does it? I'll explain why in a second. It actually is quite hard work for us. But the bigger target for us, the one we're thinking about hard, is how do you become a zero-carbon university seriously in all of your aspects, as a teacher, as a researcher, as a buyer of goods and services, as an investor, and as a runner of 700 buildings. I wanted to say, this is a little bit boring actually, but I'm a bit nerdy too. So scope, people will be familiar with the way in which you measure carbon emissions probably, but scope 1 is where you're burning something directly. So we burn gas, for example, to heat our buildings as part of our combined heat and power plants. Scope 2 is where you're doing an indirect calculation, you use electricity, and you work out how much that generates from the grid. Scope 3 is the one that often universities don't do, and we take pride in doing this, which is why we're struggling with our emissions in a way, because we calculate the emissions associated with waste, with water, with staff commuting, but also with business travel, including flights, and that makes a particular challenge for us. And one of the reasons why this is a challenge for us is because we have been growing, as some of you who live on the south side will know, and that has been significant growth. So these are showing you increases between 2007-8 and 16-17. So student numbers up more than half, sorry, 54%. Staff numbers up 26%. Gross internal area, the size of the building estate, up a quarter. Turnover up, it's actually 80% now. So really substantial growth, which means that despite a range of serious actions, which you can quiz me on later, we're working really hard just to stand still on carbon emissions. And so our fundamental challenge is the zero by 2040. Engage. One of the things that's great about hearing from Alex and others is I spent most of my career trying to put these issues on the table. Does anybody give a damn about these issues? Younger people already get the fact that these are a problem and they're working on solutions. You don't have to tell them about why this is a problem. They're already saying, yeah, I got that. Thanks very much, old guy. Here's some solutions. Have you thought about them? Which I love. It's one of the great things about being in a university. Paradox of success. Well, that's a supercomputer. We've just got funding for a new supercomputer. It does marvelous stuff, including helping with climate modeling. It's also 2 megawatts of power, and it's going to be much larger in the future. So in one sense, it's helping with the climate problem by doing climate modeling calculations. In the other sense, it's not. This is the flow wave tank. If you've never seen it, it's marvelous down at King's Building. It's a giant circular testing tank which you can simulate tidal and marine and wave patterns. It's unique. It's fantastic. Its only purpose is to kickstart the marine renewables industry, so it's a good thing for the climate. But for me, it's another 1.5 megawatts on the list. Laboratories, so we are doing wonderful work on regenerative medicine, on bioinformatics, and a whole series of things that will help people with dementia, with cancer and so on. But we've got 1,000 labs, and they are energy intensive, as you'll know, because you need to ventilate them in case you kill people with the chemicals you're using in them. So, a bit of a paradox there. And the final one is flights, which we'll come back to. I'm often asked the question, are you comfortable with the university taking a lot of flights? Yes, not casually, but you know, we are building out facilities in China to help China decarbonize, and we're flying back and forth to help them. I was in Chile last year trying to help them think about sustainability. Yes, I can Skype, but I also need to see their facilities and build relationships with them. We want to give our students a better experience. We want them to develop their career attributes and learn in the real world by traveling to places. And we have a whole bunch of researchers, for example, in Malawi, transforming the approach to sleeping sickness. It's difficult to do that without taking a flight. So these are real paradoxes. This is a little breakdown of where our emissions come from. So 2015, big red chunk electricity, blue chunk gas, the lighter chunk flights. You get the point already. By 2025, as the grid decarbonizes, the amount of carbon in our emissions coming from electricity is decreasing, gas is increasing, but particularly flights is greatly increasing. And you'll notice that land-based transport doesn't really feature because it's a tiny slither. But to come back to what I'm supposed to be talking about, we have an integrated transport plan and paid tribute to colleagues who, I'm not sure if there's any in the audience from the States, who've done tremendous work, Emma Crowther and others over the years on this. So we want to increase the proportion of staff and students traveling to the university on foot and by bike, reduce car driving, increase the proportion of electric cars, improve public transport, and then increase the proportion of electric cars within our own fleet. So how are we doing? Well, 90% of our staff and students use active travel on public transport, says our last survey from 2017. That's pretty good. We promote the sustainable travel hierarchy. Don't travel unless you have to. Let's think about technology that can help you Skype and email and video conference. We calculate and give to people information about the travel choices they make and the carbon implications of that, including the staggering one that if you go first class on a plane, it's 75% more carbon than if you do economy class. So don't do that if you can avoid that, please. It's just showing you in a bit more detail our modal split. So as you can see, a huge number of people are walking to work and walking around to get to the university, partly because maybe they're a student and they don't have much choice because they don't have any resources to do anything else. But there are a lot of staff walking, a lot of buses, a lot of cycling, a relatively small amount of car use, actually. However, that depends on where you are. So not much car use in the centre, but if you're working at Easterbush, that picture's a bit different. But overall, you know, the numbers are not too bad, I would say. I'm not trying to say that we don't have any issues. On public transport, yes, well, we're negotiating with Lothian buses as well. We would like a broader range of student ticket options. If you quiz me on what they are, I'm not going to tell you because we're having discussions with Lothian buses, but we would like to see the sorts of things that were being said earlier. And we'd like public transport provision to be regarded as good or excellent by most of our students and staff. We were really pleased to take part in the citywide Just Eats cycle scheme. I was asking somebody earlier, and the general feeling is it's working well. Looking forward to the electric bikes coming too. We have 8 docking stations like this, so 2, one at George Square and one at Bristow Square, 4 down at KB, 1 at Pollock Halls and 1 at, is it Riego Street? Is that how you pronounce it? I can never say. But anyway, we were really pleased. That took quite a lot of effort to work with Transport for Edinburgh. We want to see more of it, but we think it's working well. Cycling in general, you may not know, but the Bay Centre, just up the road, just across the street, actually, we've put in a 400-space cycle store in the basement with showering, changing facilities. We've received a lot of grant funding from Cycling Scotland to put in more capacity all over the place. We now have 5,500 cycle parking spaces, of which about half of them are secure. So we're doing more and more to try and put in more cycling racks. Not always how we'd want them. So this is down at the Pleasance where people wanted cycle racks, but the only place we could find at the time was these upright ones. I'm sure the cyclists, the audience, are going to say they're not perfect, but you know they're still well used because people want them. Moving on to our fleet, so 30% of our fleet is now, our estate's fleet is now 0 emissions, and that's 21 charge points for electric vehicles. It's now 33, so you can see how these slides were only put together a wee while ago, but we're moving fast in trying to decarbonise the fleet, and all of our all of our internal mail is now delivered by electric vans, and all of our security guards that go around the premises are all driven with electric vans. And I work just out of shot, and these things come creeping down the street. And isn't it wonderful that they're free from pollution, but they're also free from noise a lot of the time? So I actually realised that you have to watch these days because these things come in. Anyway, we're trying to put in place way more electric vehicles. There's a lot of travel between the campuses of the universities for very good reasons. So for delivering of food, for example, or people who've got bulky items for teaching. And so we're trying to make sure that as far as possible, electric vehicles. So just to finish off, are these game changers for transport carbon emissions for the university? What do you think I'm going to say? No, they're not, actually, because air travel accounts for 95% of our travel emissions. So we've now got a handle on that sort of stuff. The first thing is to understand. So I can now understand who is traveling, where they're going, how much it's costing us, how long it takes, where the main destinations are. So half of all our flights are going to London. We need to do something about that. We are doing something about that. That is declining. However, that is a relatively small proportion of carbon emissions because the growth is coming in European and long haul, and it's linked to these, and we can debate this, these questions around, so should we stop going to China then to try and persuade the Chinese to decarbonize and bring our expertise from the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation? Yes, we can Skype. No, we can't really take a boat. So there are really difficult questions around the multiple objectives of the university, and we're going to have to try and grow the university and do more travel at the same time to decarbonise. So we have a project on this. Stage 1 is what I've already mentioned, which is understanding our travel. Stage 2 is understanding travel behaviours. There are real incentives and pressures on academics to travel for conferences and for collaboration. How do you change that culture? How do you even get people saying, well, once you've been to China 10 times, maybe after that you can Skype? Are the incentives for rail travel as strong as they could be, for example? Is the technology good enough, or are you going to get to your important conference with leading academics from Harvard, MIT, and Yale to find that some bugger has dismantled all the video conferencing equipment again, and it doesn't work? So these are what we're doing right now with a bunch of schools and academics. And finally, institution that behavior change, leading by example, and the dreaded word offsetting as well. Do some real offsetting in the meantime until we can get a handle on this. So in summary, I'd probably overrun. I would say we do take our climate change responsibilities very seriously. If you don't agree with me, I'd love to debate that. We're committed to being a zero carbon university. We don't know how we'll get there yet. I would say good progress on land transport, lots of other benefits from that. But for us and carbon, transport emissions, it's flights are the next issue, and that's the issue we'll be focusing on. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you. Hello. Hi, Inverness. I'm not taking questions for doing this. Okay, so my name is Caroline. I'm the climate campaigner for Friends of the Earth Scotland. We're a campaigning organisation based here in Edinburgh. And we're part of Friends of the Earth International, which is a network of grassroots campaigning organisations across the world with 75 member groups. And many of those groups and many of our colleagues are living in places and seeing the impacts of climate change here and now. So I've been asked to talk about transport and the new climate change bill. And I know that Dave touched on this a bit earlier, but I just wanted to sort of frame this discussion by setting it in the context of the climate crisis and the urgency with which we need to adopt all of these solutions that we've been talking about. So this was taken by Mozambique Search and Rescue just 2 days ago. This is over the Buzi region. One of my very good colleagues, my very good friends, Dipti Bhatnagar, who's the climate justice coordinator for Friends of the Earth International, has been relaying the things that people are seeing on the ground. And this is the real impact of climate change. It's overwhelmingly the people who are living in the places who have done the least to cause this crisis who are hit first and hit worst by this. The president of Mozambique thinks 1,000 people may have lost their lives. The UN says that 2.6 million people have been affected. So you will forgive me if I lose my patience with people who think that it's fine to continue as we are, because what we are doing in the global north is affecting the lives, the livelihoods of people living in the global south. This crisis is happening now. It is urgent, and we need to get to grips with it. So Scotland has a historical and has a moral responsibility to act on climate change. We have to go faster. We have to go further. And we have both the money and the technological capability to do so compared to places like Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe that have been hit this week. So it's very much a justice issue. Climate change is a huge injustice, and it exacerbates all of the other injustices. And when we're talking about transport, let's not forget that this is an air pollution crisis. It's a social justice issue. There's about a quarter, just over a quarter of households in Scotland don't actually have access to a car. And overwhelmingly, the people who are affected by air pollution are those who are the most vulnerable, the oldest, the youngest, the people who are living in the poorest areas. So it's very much a social justice issue. It's an intergenerational justice issue, as Alex talked about. It's an international justice issue. So that's just to frame the context that when we're talking about this stuff and we're talking about people feeling inconvenienced by some of the policies that we're suggesting, it's nothing. It's nothing compared to the inconvenience of people facing the reality of climate change. So, I mean, I guess probably everyone has seen the IPCC report or seen it on the news. Yes, hopefully. Claudia touched on it briefly earlier, and that's looking at the impacts of global warming at 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees, which is the temperatures in the Paris Agreement, and what the world needs to do to meet them. One of the things that has come out of this, it's not actually written in the report, it was something the media have said afterwards, is that we have 12 years to save the world. We don't. If we don't get our act together urgently, we'll be seeing even more grave impacts within 12 years. So we have to get on this now, today, this year, next year. This has to happen urgently. So what do we have to do? This is what the IPCC has actually said. We need rapid, far-reaching transitions in energy, land, infrastructure, including transport. What we have to do is unprecedented in scale, and the next decade of action is crucial. So we have to do basically everything we can think of, and we have to do it now. And to this, when we're thinking about the transport system, it's not just about tinkering around the edges. We need whole-scale change. We need a new holistic transport system that works for people and that drives down our carbon emissions. So I've been invited to talk about the Climate Change Bill, and this is a new law which is coming in Scotland. And this year, because of this new law, we have got a very, very real opportunity in Scotland to deliver to the speed and scale of change that the IPCC says is needed. And Claudia touched on some of this stuff earlier. And as Claudia said, it doesn't really do that. So the bill was promised to us, and just to sort of explain that, a bill is a draft law. We already have a law, a Climate Change Act, and this new bill is designed to replace and update the law that we currently have. We were promised that this was going to scale up Scotland's climate ambition in the light of the Paris Agreement. We were promised that this was going to see Scotland play our full part in tackling climate change. But it really doesn't do that. It very slightly changes our targets. So the 2050 target, so 30-odd years away, it changes slightly. It reduces our emissions by 90% compared with what they were in 1990, instead of 80%, which is what we're currently set to do. What we're going to do over the next 10 years has barely changed. And remember, the IPCC said the next 10 years are the crucial period for action. And it doesn't commit to any policy. It doesn't commit to delivering any real-world change in terms of transport or agriculture or the other areas that have seen a lack of action. And so this pathway, so the black line is how we're doing already in Scotland, the emissions that we've already reduced. The blue line is what we're committed to doing under the law we currently have. And this line is what the new law is going to do. I don't know, does that look like ambitious action to you? So much faster, we need to do much, much further. I mean, this keeps us on the same path to 2035, as I said, and it doesn't commit to real-world change. Claudia showed this earlier, but this is the... Probably yours. It's actually from the Scottish Government. So this is just showing that transport has the largest share of climate emissions from any sector in Scotland. It's responsible for 37.3% of our climate emissions. These figures are from 2016. We get the figures every year, sort of a year and a half behind. So the 2016 figures show that transport is the biggest climate emitter, 37.3%. So what does that include? It includes public transport, it includes freight, it includes private cars, and it includes a share of aviation and shipping. Even if you take out that share of aviation and shipping, it's still up there. It's still 32.6%. It hasn't changed. It hasn't improved in 25 years. I know this is a bit of a horrible graph. I don't even know if the people in Inverness can see these graphs, so sorry. So the top line that's coming down, that's our energy supply. And in 1990, coal power stations were emitting 15 million tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. Now, none. So from 15 million tonnes to nothing. We've managed to do that in the electricity sector. We've got rid of coal-fired power stations. Transport, which is the second line coming down, the one with the circles. In 1990, transport was responsible for 13 million tonnes of CO2 every year, almost as much as that coal-fired power station. Now, still 13 million tonnes per year. And this is just another nice way of still showing how nothing's happened. So the fourth from the right here is transport, showing that it's cut emissions by a marginal amount, barely worth talking about as a reduction. And why? Because we're investing in major road building instead of active travel and public transport. Because, as was mentioned earlier, the Scottish Government's own figures think that car use will continue to rise. Car ownership and car use will continue to rise unchecked and unchallenged. And because there are proposals in place to scrap the tax on the aviation industry and to support new aviation expansion. So we know these things aren't working. We know this is a huge sector that we absolutely have to tackle in Scotland if we're going to tackle our climate emissions, but also if we're going to tackle air pollution, that health issue. And if we're just going to build a holistic transport model that works for people, that gets people from where they are to where they need to be at the times they need to be there, at a cost that is affordable in a way that is comfortable, that's what people deserve. And that's not what we have at the moment. So what needs to happen in transport? The top thing here, this phase out the need for fossil fuel cars and vans by 2032. This is something that the Scottish Government have committed to as a policy. Campaigning groups, Friends of the Earth Scotland, Stop Climate Chaos Scotland Coalition, we were calling for a ban on new fossil fuel vehicles by 2030. So we claim this as a bit of a win. We made a lot of noise. This is the power of campaigning. However, what we've seen about that so far is that those plans are very, very much about the sort of technical solutions. So far, it's been a lot of talk about electric vehicles, electric superhighway, charging points, etc. We do need to replace fossil fuel vehicles, for sure. We need newer vehicles, but we need to be thinking about fewer vehicles. So we need to be thinking about how we create that clean, green public transport system, how we put more money into active travel. And the 10% of transport budget to be spent on active travel, again, that's something that lots of different campaign groups, including Spokes, have been calling for a long time. It was maybe 2 years back that we won, 2 or 3 years back, that we won a bit of a boost for the active travel budget from government. So we won a commitment to doubling the spend, the active travel budget. That was great, but it's still not near 10%. It's still not nearly enough. And we need to challenge the things about, you know, this just domination of cars and this prioritization of cars. And I'm sure everyone saw the uproar about workplace parking levies. We need to tackle this in all sorts of ways. So deprioritizing cars in urban areas, particularly pedestrianisation, low emission zones, proper, decent low emission zones that work, that keep the worst polluting vehicles out of the city centre. Enforcing parking restrictions, the 20-mile-per-hour limit as well that Claudia talked about earlier, car-free zones and days, parking levies. There's a whole host of things that need to happen. They need to happen in tandem. Much of this is at government level, but some of this is also about powers being given to the local authority level. But then it's also about campaigning for the local authorities to use those powers and be able to take them forward, and for them to be able to get the funding to use those powers and take those things forward. So there's no one easy answer. I'm sorry. It's a complex system that we have with our transport system, and it requires a whole host of interconnecting policies to drive the solution. As I say, a solution that will work for people, for climate emissions, for cleaning up our air quality. So just to come back to the climate bill, I can't see a clock from here, by the way, so someone can... So to come back to the climate bill, I'm going to skip over how a bill becomes a law. We should make it better. We talked a bit earlier about the climate strikers, about the emerging movements. I don't know if anyone here saw the climate strikes or went down to Parliament on Friday. It was both one of the most heartening and one of the most depressing demos that I've ever been at. It's incredible to see so many thousands of articulate, passionate, informed young people out on the street calling for change. But it's really sad indictment of the failure of government to act, that they need to come out of school and do that. And there was a lot of talk about how can we as adults support the climate strikers and how can we support and amplify their message. And one of the very best ways to do that is just to start taking action. So if you want to talk about the climate change bill and improvements to that bill and improvements to transport just generally across the piece, talk to your MSPs. People like Claudia, they are in the Parliament during the week. I mean, you're all here in Edinburgh, so actually it's much easier for people in Edinburgh to speak to MSPs than it is for many others. They're in Parliament during the week and they have surgeries in their local areas at the weekend. And they're there to work for us and to listen to us and to represent the views of the people and take that back into the work that they're doing in Parliament and in committee. If you have never met your MSP before and you want help with that, I mean, speak to Claudia, but also we at Friends of the Earth and Stop Climate Chaos Scotland have lots of resources on how to help you do that. Parliament is going to debate the climate bill, as Claudia said, on the 2nd of April. This is the first time that the whole Parliament are going to come together to discuss climate change and the climate bill. So far it's been Claudia and her colleagues in the committee. We're going to be outside. We're going to have a rally outside Parliament from 12:30 till 2. We want to see lots of people there. You know, if we're all too old to join the climate strikes, you're definitely not too old to join this. Come along, get involved, show that there's a serious, serious demand for urgent climate action. And if you're going to come, contact your MSP and tell them you're going to be there and ask them to come out at lunchtime. On the 22nd of May, there's a Healthy Streets event here in Edinburgh run by Friends of the Earth Edinburgh and Transition Edinburgh. So for anyone who's particularly interested in the links between air pollution and transport and how to get involved. Where's Katrina? Did she make it? Hi, right up at the very back, waving. Katrina's from Friends of the Earth Edinburgh. They also have a smaller campaign group who are working on air pollution and transport stuff. And if you want to get involved in that group, then go up there. And then there's this consultation on Edinburgh's low emission zone. It's going to happen in June. It's really important that we all put our views across in that consultation to make that as strong as possible. And then the climate bill comes back to Parliament. It will have a bit of a break now, probably. Things may happen in May, June, but it won't finish really until autumn, December. These are democratic processes. These are decisions that are going to affect all of us. They're going to affect future generations. We need to have a say in this, and we need to remember that our decisions here impact people who are not in this room and people who are not in this country. And we have got the sort of the power and the privilege and the ability to influence this bill and to influence these processes. So please make the most of that opportunity and take action. Thank you.
Well, thanks for 4 fantastic, informative and passionate speeches. We're now going on to the QA session. I've just got a couple of quick announcements to make while Martin sorts out the microphones and so on. We're always delighted when politicians come sit in the audience and not even have the honour of speaking at the front. and I can see at least one of them up there. Would you like to put up your hand, Chaz? That's Chaz Booth, who is Edinburgh Council Green Transport spokesperson. Are there any other councillors or even MSPs here? Not today. We usually have one or two. Okay, Pedal on Parliament this year is going to be April 27th and 28th, but it's very different. It's not going to be one big event. It's going to be groups putting on local actions to illustrate some particular problem. And the Spokes Portobello group, for example, is going to be doing something. So if you go to the Pedal on Parliament website, you can find out more. And then June the 6th to the 16th, the fantastic Edinburgh Festival of Cycling. Kim is just there. Stick your hand up, Kim. If anyone is interested in putting on an event or has ideas for that, please go and see Kim. And finally, if you're not a member of Spokes, we'd love you to join so we can keep you in touch with stuff. There will be a stall down in the foyer on your way out. And finally, just to say, I've also noticed another very important person here, and the newish Scotland Active Nation Commissioner. That's Lee Craigie up there, if you want to have a quick word with her afterwards. So thank you very much. I'll pass over to Elizabeth now.
Okay, hello everybody, and now comes the even more fun part where we get to ask questions of our panel. I am going to ask just in a preliminary way, given that we have restricted the length of time that our speakers were able to speak, that we also, when asking questions or making brief comments, genuinely keep them brief and not make it another presentation, even though we very much value what you have to say. So I'll begin taking some questions, and then you also have time at the end to wrap up. So I see one in the very. I'll start over here. Sorry, I know you guys were there first. I'll get you. Yes, brown sweater. Miss.
One of the things that Claudia mentioned was a comparison between cycling in the Netherlands and cycling in Scotland and Europe in general. Now, one of the big differences, as you know, and mentioned just briefly, is presumed liability. And there's absolutely zero intent on behalf of the Labour Party to do anything about it. And I'm sure that would increase cycle usage. Do you agree?
I think I'll just do a few. So presumed liability. So in the far back, Chaz.
Thanks very much. I've already been outed as Chaz Booth, Green Councillor for Leith and Green Transport spokesperson. So the IPCC says we need radical change, and yet in Edinburgh, more than half of our cycling projects are delayed. Now, there's a number of reasons why our cycling projects are delayed, but one of them is that the process that the council has to go through to put an active travel infrastructure on the ground, a traffic regulation order, is massively bureaucratic and takes a long time. Councils and campaigning organisations asked for the Scottish Government to streamline this process through the Transport Bill, but in the draft Transport Bill, there's no sign of this. So there's a massive mismatch here between the radical action that we need and the Scottish Government apparently dragging its feet. So this question is primarily for Caroline and Claudia. Can we get that into the Transport Bill? And if not, why not?
Okay, why don't we, should we just take those two, and it could be for, they're directed primarily at a couple, but anyone can answer. Presumed liability and the infrastructure bill.
So do I take mine?
You certainly can. Thank you, Noel.
Great, okay. I don't want to be defensive about the question I was asked about presumed liability. I've supported it along with cycle law for some time and done what I can to promote it. My party doesn't yet support it as a policy. I think our Scottish Policy Forum process has just started again, and I would encourage, just like Caroline was encouraging people to speak to MSPs, I would advise the ones who aren't so keen on higher targets, speak to those ones. But in terms of our policy process, and indeed the other parties' policy processes, the Scottish Government isn't supporting presumed liability either. I think and hope the Greens are, but maybe Chaz can, yes, they are. So I think it's really important to push on that through policy processes and give evidence to it. And I think it's one of the fundamental things that needs to happen in order for vulnerable road users walking as well as cycling to be safe. And I'm absolutely determined to go on fighting to make sure that that happens as one of many possibilities. As far as what you were saying, Chaz, interestingly, today in the Regulated Roads Bill, which Mark Ruskell's taking through, there was quite a lot of questioning and discussion about the TRO's transport regulation orders. And actually, Mark was saying that it's important that there is a consultation, because it's important that that everybody who is involved from different perspectives makes decisions about whether there should be an active travel section to a road, hopefully on-road segregated cycle lanes rather than just a bloody line in the road, excuse me swearing. But I think that the consultations are important, but I would be very happy to talk to you and others who see ways in which the actual bureaucratic, as I think the word used, system can be altered. And I'm happy to do that. And I seem to be taking through, or trying to take through, a great deal of amendments and a great deal of bills, but happy to look at that, as I'm sure others would be as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chaz. I have to fess up to not being in on the detail of the transport bill, but helpfully my colleague Gavin is up at the back, who's reading it very thoroughly. But just to say that, yeah, I mean, that's a great idea. We definitely need to reduce bureaucracy on local authorities to be able to allow them to implement the kind of policies that we need for this transformational action. And it's certainly possible to bring forward an amendment to that effect. The transport bill is not yet far enough down the line that we can't change it for the better, certainly.
Okay. Any others? Yes. In the green.
Hi, Claudia. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on workplace parking levies.
Okay, I think we have time. Yes. Lots of gentlemen speaking. Where are our bell bicyclists who might have? Yes, in the back. So you've got one to note. We'll take one.
Thanks. Dave Holiday, one for Dave and one for Claudia, possibly. Yesterday I was at a mass conference where they're looking at how £2 million of Scottish government money is going to be offered to projects which integrate transport, particularly looking how we can use our smart ticketing. For example, you might be able to use the university matriculation card and staff cards as a bus pass between university sites, things like that. So I'd like to see how the university is presenting itself with that, particularly since you must be generating probably 30,000 trips a day for staff and students, and that's a very attractive figure to talk to a bus company. For Claudia, the details of being able to engage with the audience who are not cycling, the people who are put off by various things. And there are some things which have generated growth. Glasgow has seen 30% growth in cycles parked with their cycle parking programme since 1995. We've seen step changes in transport where people have taken to bikes because it is the obvious way to go. And a survey with bikes in taxis showed that we would probably double the number of people cycling if they knew they could put the bike on a taxi or in a bus when the going gets too hard or the road gets too difficult. And I'm aware of this going on already, so perhaps comments on that. And finally, with presumed liability, the 1903 Motor Car Act actually provided for presumed liability. We're just not enforcing it.
Okay, and I think that the second question, if I would like to open that up, because it's very much about creating incentives isn't it? So, so maybe we'll start with Dave. That was a specific one, and then open up the others for building in incentives.
So I want to make a bigger point and then try and answer the question. So we've done quite well on climate change emissions in certain easy areas. So power was relatively easy to decarbonize compared to what's coming. We've done next to nothing on housing. We've done next to nothing on heating. We've done next to nothing on transport, as we know, but we've also agriculture. There are great swathes of what we're doing that are now facing more difficult things. It's quite easy to shut down 2 coal-fired power stations compared to changing the way people design and run cities. And so I think we probably need to face up to that. I think we've got fundamental changes we need to make, and we're miles away from making them. I'm faced with, for example, trying to figure out what the future of heat looks like for a university. We invested in 5 combined heat and power plants in the 90s and 2000s. We spent almost 50 million on that. They're no longer the best answer, but it's not completely obvious what the answer is. So I think the systemic issues that we need to think about, particularly in urban environments, I think the way in which we design, this is me being radical for a second, give my own views, the way in which we design and manage land, the fact that we don't allow the public sector to buy and compulsorily purchase land at its current use value rather than its uplift value, the fact that when we put in infrastructure, we allow private developers to capture most of that and not give it back to the public who need it. The fact that if you buy land, it's just a way of really just making capital appreciation every year, and we don't tax land properly either. There's a whole series of more radical, I feel a little bit like Andy Whiteman in a way, but, there's a whole series of questions like that. I also think that, yes, compared to European cities, we don't design for people in place, do we? It's obvious, isn't it? You can see tourists. I walk up every day from Waverley to get to the bridges. You can almost see people as they cross the Coburn Street or something, being killed by the maniac van driver. And they're not used to that, are they? Not expecting to come to the cultural capital of the UK in a way and find that, we haven't designed in for people walking around. So I think those are fundamental things. To the actual question, sorry, yes, absolutely. We would love to see much more systematic integration of transport within the city and us playing our part in that. There's not just our university. There are 3 other universities in the city, and there must be what? And the college. And the colleges, thank you. So there must be what, 60, 70,000 students? I don't know the exact number. You've got 20, we've got 40, there's at least another 20,000. So that's a large number we could be. 2 of the quick points is that our students can't really believe when we don't digitize. When you've grown up digital, the fact that, everything isn't seamless is a bit of a joke to people under a certain age. Finally, one quick worry. So we've seen what happens when you take big data, you don't consider the ethics of that and the confidentiality issues, and you design Google, Facebook, and so on. We need to think hard in terms of urban mobility. If we move to smart systems, that we're not also introducing perverse things that we didn't expect. So I think I would put that one note of caution. We are creating a professorship of data ethics because we think that these questions, as we go smart, these questions of ethics need to come to the forefront of our mind as well. Thanks.
Is there anything that any of the other panelists would like to add to this question about really building in incentives, not necessarily for people in this room, many of whom, if not most of whom, cycled here or did not drive, but what about other, are there other incentives we can build in for the non or not yet cyclists?
I'm sure there are loads more than I can think of, and it's partly about listening to other people. And I think what Caroline said is really, really important about getting in touch with MSPs with the transport bill coming up. On that basis, with active and public transport friendly MSPs for amendments, whereas it's about persuading MSPs in other ways who maybe aren't so keen and can't get out of their cars. There are some of us. But the sort of thing that I'm thinking along the lines of is incentivizing, how do we really help people? How do we make it easy for them? So in the Parliament, we're lucky enough to have really good changing facilities for cycling, which I use, and there's showers, and there's good places to sit, and places to dry your towel, and all that kind of thing. And I think through the transport bill, for instance, we could bring in some amendments to do with that, to say that if there's a commercial building, non-residential building over a certain size, that it should, and it's new, it should have that in it, you know, as law. And things like that, I think, can really be helpful. I think the fact that Edinburgh, the city we're in, as we all know tonight, has 10% of its transport budget is for active travel, does put the Scottish Government to shame. It puts my party to shame, and I would frankly like to see that change. And again, I would encourage people to talk to MSPs about that, because it is just absolutely ridiculous for all the reasons that we've heard about in terms of good spaces to live in and good ways to get around and safe places for people to, I was going to say people to play, we all like to play, and that's really, really important. In terms of presumed liability from the back, I didn't, my understanding is, and Brenda and Rod Mitchell are lawyers, and perhaps, you know, you could, because I do have to go because I'm not very well tonight, but perhaps you could email me about that, because my understanding is that as a civil law that it's not law in this country yet, but that was my understanding. In terms of the workplace parking levy, which was asked at the back, I knew that would come up. I'll be open about it. I feel uncomfortable about that position that our party holds, where I'm bound in the shadow cabinet by collective responsibility. It's not my brief, and that's not to pass the buck, but it was like a decision that had to be made within 48 hours, and there were a lot of people in our party and in unions who were arguing that it's a regressive tax on workers. And at our conference, ASLEF brought forward a motion which was almost unanimously supported, not by the Social Environment Resource Association, which I'm a member of, but by almost everybody, because it was seen as regressive, and that if people are on shifts or if they don't have any good public transport at the moment, that it's not something that is fair on workers. On the other hand, as I think it was Caroline said, but somebody certainly said on the panel, I'm sorry, I can't remember which of us it wasn't me though, that a quarter of people don't have cars, and nearly all the young people I meet don't want a car unless they really, really have to have one. It's not anymore that sort of status rite of passage that it used to be, and I really respect young people for that view, you know. ASLEF's motion talked about shift workers, and I mean, I don't really think it is a regressive tax, because a lot of the people, when I'm cycling in Edinburgh to the Parliament, I try to cycle along the canal. It'd be nice if there were more segregated cycle lanes, but especially around Toll Cross bit. But a lot of the cars are, I'm going to be really sexist now, a lot of them are driven by men, and they're SUVs, is it that it is, and the exhaust, terrifying thought what you said, Caroline, about the exhaust coming out about the level of kids' mouths, you know, but comes out quite hard at cyclists as well. And I just think that's just really unacceptable in this day and age. So it's not a policy I feel comfortable with. It is going to pass because there will be a majority in the Parliament for it. And let's all remember that where there are places that there is good public transport, like Edinburgh, and the Labour group in Edinburgh supports it, and I hope it will come, you know, but it can't come if there isn't public transport. So that's rather a convoluted answer, but I hope it sort of sheds some light on the challenges that parties face. Oh, we are offering free bus travel for young people if we get into power. So there's something that is progressive.
Pass that to it. So on the whole incentives, and also I'm going to touch on some of what Claudia said about car driving and young people as well. I 100% agree we need to improve public transport and provide incentives for people to use more sustainable transport. But you don't need to be an economist, and I'm not one, to see that the cost of driving is undervalued. So the real cost of what it is to drive is just so much less than the social and the environmental cost that it actually produces. And I don't know the exact figures, but someone might be able to tell me about the fact that fuel duty hasn't risen in about 8 years. So the cost of driving has gone down whilst the cost of public transport's gone up in the last 30 years. So we need incentives, but we also need to disincentivize the bad habits. At Edinburgh College, we have a free-for-all parking system where you can basically park wherever you like for free. And people do. I should point out that I'm Edinburgh College Students Association, an independent organisation, so I'm somewhat free to criticise the college. But therein lies issues, because I'm a staff member of a students' association. We're supposed to be thinking about what benefits students and where their interests lie. And on the one hand, on the long term, reducing car usage by charging for car parking spaces and introducing workplace parking levies is good because of the long-term environmental impact on the reduction of the impact of climate change on our young people and our students. So I'm kind of torn between advocating for that, but on the other hand, as I kind of mentioned, the demographics of our Edinburgh College students are some of the most deprived parts of Edinburgh and the surrounding area. If we were to charge for them to drive and there wasn't adequate public transport in place, although on the whole Edinburgh College is relatively well connected to public transport, you know, charging the true cost of a car parking space would be very, very unaffordable to our young students. So I'm kind of torn between advocating on the one hand we need to think of students' interests on the long term, but on the short term their financial interests, and I kind of have to equivocate about that. You said that you think that, so as I pointed out in the presentation, overall young people are driving less than older people, and we're driving less than young people used to. And you talked about the status symbol of a car. I think there's a real divide between classes. I'm thoroughly middle class, and I definitely see car driving as like not a cool thing. But the deprived young people who go to Edinburgh College, there's a lot of automotive students, but it's not just for students studying automotive engineering. It's kind of students across all subjects. They might not have much, but there's a lot of like 17-year-old boys who are damn proud they've got a car because they don't come from good backgrounds, and they are proud to have a car and to drive it and show it off to their friends. So those are my thoughts about these issues.
Anyone else before we go back to questions? Yes, okay. Yes, I think this might be, so this gentleman in the blue, he's all the way down here. I don't want to give up my mic. It's just, it's a power thing right here. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to go. Ideally, this would have been a question for Claudia, but I appreciate she has to go. I'll make it quick. But you mentioned earlier Mark Ruskell's bill for the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit across the country, and Dave mentioned the mad van driver going down Coburn Street. So my question is, if the bill does go through, rolling it out across the country, you know, the experience of Edinburgh, my experience and all of our experiences as cyclists, is that it isn't enforced at all. How is that going to happen? You know, it's there in paper, but it's completely useless. We have cardboard cutout policemen, and that's it.
So, Claudia, I'll let you answer this one, and then we will release you. We will release you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so difficult. Well, I've tried to get in every week for Mark's bill in the evidence sessions. I missed one, but so I missed the police one. But I understand that they were saying that the resources are really difficult and you know what I'm going to say, for enforcing the 30-mile-an-hour limit. And I don't think, my view is it wouldn't be any different for the 20-mile-an-hour limit. It would just be that they'd be enforcing a different limit. And I think Mark's bill shows that it's very reasonable where there would or would not be restricted roads. I won't go into the detail of that. But I don't know. I think, sorry, I'm quite tired. I think it's really difficult because everyone can say there aren't enough resources, but I think as much as it being about enforcement, and things must be enforced, that it is about education. And there have been very, very good education promotional things on television about what smoking does to us, or perhaps not on television so much, but about wearing seat belts and I think that culture shift that Mark, if you listen to his evidence this morning, partly in relation to a question I asked, but other people as well, the culture shift that is happening is really important. And Servation did a poll this week that said that 72% of the public would be happy about 20s plenty. whereas in 2017 it was, I think, 65%. So that's a significant, you know, 3/4 of people, not just in Edinburgh, but in throughout Scotland, and it wasn't a UK survey, it was a Scotland survey, are positive about it. So I think I'm very optimistic about it. I know Michael Matheson isn't. I don't want to be too party political tonight, but he didn't really. He seemed to be kicking into the long grass a bit. I know there are costs, but you know there are costs for the police. Let's just all who can afford it pay a bit more taxes, and on that point I'll go.
Okay. Could I add to that, as I've got the microphone in my hand? It's a pet subject of mine. It's not true that there isn't any enforcement. There is enforcement. The road policing units have been out several times around Edinburgh in 20-mile-an-hour areas, and they're encouraging local communities to contact them and identify where there are problems so that they can target those specific areas. The same units have been out on bikes doing Operation Close Pass, looking out for people driving too close to cyclists. And the guys who do it are really, really keen on what they do. With other priorities and things, they don't do it as much as they'd like to be able to. The West Midlands Police are the exemplary unit for this, and they have a blog of their own where they talk about all the things that they're doing to calm things down on the road. And it would just be good if that could become an example that was carried out in other forces as well. And I think due to public demand and people raising issues in their local community, that they can change the priorities and get the police to spend more time doing it. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Can we, in a preliminary way, just thank Claudia for coming along? Really appreciate that. Okay, there's a gentleman right next to you. And
just on,
yeah.
On Dave's point about data ethics, I work in traffic planning and we collect a lot of data about travellers.
Sorry, just one moment.
Right, sorry. Yeah. We collect a lot of data about people travelling based on their telephone usage or their telephones. And we know how far they travel and we know if they're breaking the speed limit. That data could be used to enforce speeding. What about the ethics of that?
Okay, well, I'm just the chair, so I'm going to put that over. Yes, I'm still. I see this gentleman, and it's over to it's over to this fellow here. Right. Yes.
Sorry, I should have asked this before Claudia left, but I'd like to suggest that, or I'd like to ask, do we need an active travel bill, and if yes, how do we get one?
That's good. One more for the mix, or should we throw it over to the panel? Okay. Data and a new active travel bill. Data ethics.
That's a really difficult question, I think. I don't think we've yet understood as a society the threshold that we're about to be upon in terms of the connection of internet-enabled devices, the Internet of Things, the ability to watch people, the ability to understand where they're spending money. So, for example, lots of banks want us to go cashless, but as soon as you're going cashless, it means you're never off the grid. So you can be tracked in terms of where you spend, how often you spend. Your mobile phone will be telling people where you are. The apps that you're using will tell people where you've been shopping, but also what you've been looking at. They will sell that to other people who will then sell you advertisements. It's easy to see how nasty governments, in fact, there are authoritarian governments who are already tracking people in the way that you're talking about. So I think there are a set of rules that society needs to agree before this gets. We're already quite far into this, to be honest. We've seen this with. I know people realise what happens when you use Facebook. So there are a whole series of algorithms battling out in a multi-billion-dollar business to make sure that their advert appears, and they do that on the basis of what you post, but also who your friends are and what they post and whether you like what they post, and also watch other sites you've been to, and so on and so on. And all that's happening, you might not know that's happening. So I think there's a whole series of questions that we need to think about before we are able to say that smart urban systems are something that we want to adopt. So it's not much of an answer, is it? Well, I think it's a really complicated area that we need to tread carefully. We should unlock the power of data. We can do massive amounts. If you think about heating a building, we're thinking about this at the moment. What you used to do in the old days was centralize it, and a man, usually a man somewhere, would decide, it's a bit cold today, I'll turn the heating on. Now we have better systems that means that the lights will go out, for example, the building's not being used, but you can go way beyond that. You can start to put in sensors, sensing how much carbon dioxide is in the room and making adjustments based upon that. You can track people on their phones as to how likely they are to turn up at the next destination and turn the heating on in advance for them and so on. These are things you can do, but we have a professor who wired up his house to be smart. And then it's down to such level of granularity, he wondered why the toilet was being used while they were all on holiday. And it was because a cleaner used the toilet. But you can see how that could be misused by an awful lot of people. So I think we have to think quite carefully about some of this stuff before we then harness this for our environmental purposes. So quite a long, rambly answer, but I think it's a really, really good question.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. And then what about an active travel bill?
Yes. So, as I was saying, we're pushing at the minute for a really strong climate change bill. We need to focus on that in the short term. We would need to win the significant increase in the levels of ambition in that bill. And once we get those strong targets, that will give us the framework, and government will then be able to see, okay, that's what we need to reach for. We're going to need serious change to our transport system and other systems to be able to meet the targets that we get in that bill. So an active travel bill coming on the back of that absolutely makes sense. And groups like Spokes and people like yourselves will be really instrumental in pushing for a bill like that really delivers the things that we want to see. But yeah, short term, let's keep pushing for the overarching ambition that we need. And then once we've won that, let's go for an active travel bill. And how do you get it? Just keep on asking for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And you got that, Dave, for the Spokes agenda as well? Okay, good. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you mind if he answers that first?
I was just very minor point. I was just going to say that, yeah, I pretty much agree with what Caroline said, but it seems that the transport bill might also be an opportunity because it's very wide-ranging already. So I don't know if it would be too much to ask just to extend it a little bit further and include active travel provisions there. On data, I don't really have too much to say because it's not something I know about other than the adverts I get on Twitter seem to indicate that algorithms aren't that smart, but they probably will get smarter. But they're not.
Will never actually understand until they get out and try it themselves. So I would love the transport bill to perhaps have a day where, when it's being debated, all the MSPs arrive at the Parliament to debate it using active travel. Mm-hmm. It would be rather nice if they did. Mm-hmm. And what else flitted through my brain is, in terms of incentives, I've been filling out my self-employed tax return for a long time now, and all this time my bicycle miles, I think it's 20p a mile, so effectively that works out at 5p a mile because it's 20p that you can reduce your actual liability for. It hasn't gone up. It has not changed. Mm-hmm. Why not?
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. We have... there's one right, the young woman, sorry, I saw her first. Sorry, no. Yeah, one more.
Hi, I've got a question for Dave. It's about the Edinburgh University's carbon footprint. You say you're talking a lot about, or discussing, the reducing flights to London. With the world-renowned course in carbon management MSc at the university, with one of their professors refusing to fly anywhere, so he goes on the train everywhere. Why don't you just roll out a policy starting tomorrow, say, of just any time someone needs to go to London, they get the train? It seems kind of obvious to me, so I don't understand why and it's in place in so many other companies around Scotland, so why not make it obvious for the university?
Mm-hmm. Okay, is it too much if I get one more, because then we'll have to wrap it up? I'm going to get one more question, which is this gentleman there, and that'll be.
I've got one comment about the 20-mile-an-hour limits. Is that the preliminary results of the Edinburgh 20-mile-an-hour is that speeds have reduced. Now, they haven't reduced to 20 miles an hour, and we would all like them to go to below that and for people not to drive at all. But they have reduced by, I think it's 1.6 miles per hour, which sounds very small, but that translates into a 10% drop in road casualties, which, when you think of it that way, is a very significant amount. Now, I'd like to ask something of Alex and Dave, that Dave has talked about business travel and the business footprint, but does Edinburgh University and Edinburgh College try to change the hearts and minds of their students and employees in their general travel behaviour, in how they go on holidays, whether they're going to go on a round-the-world gap year before or after their student experience? It's not very much use if they reduce their car usage by a small amount during the 4 years or 3 years that they're at college, if they're going to have a huge carbon footprint with what they're doing. So
okay,
I know Edinburgh's done a lot. When I first came to Edinburgh,
you know what? I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. It's just that we only have like 3 more minutes, and I think that's it. I think the point's really well made, and it's over to Dave there. Do you have, and then the others for the if you guys want.
Does that work? Yeah. So I banned flights to London when I was the head of strategy at SEPA because I had the power to do so. I don't have the power to ban flights to London in the university in any way. We're such a large, complex community that we've tried to try and persuade more than ban. The other challenge in flights to London is many of them are going somewhere on top of that. So many of the trips to London for business in London are now going on the train, but many of the flights to London are then going somewhere else, including students who are going abroad. So that's one of the challenges. That you really want to say to people, right, I know you're going to Africa, but please take the train to get to London before you're... It's quite challenging. We are thinking about it, but we've tried to persuade. I'm a bit contrarian when it comes to travel. It goes to the point about targets as well. I think travel is a good thing. I'm not against travel. I think that travel expands the mind, makes cultural connections, and I think we need more connections in the world at the moment than we currently have. We need to increase our understanding, but we need to do it. So I'm not against travel. I'm against air pollution. I'm against inequality in patterns of travel access, and I'm against climate change. So I don't want to stop our students coming from where they're coming. We're a very international university. Almost half our students are coming from China and other places. I want to figure out how we can, for the moment, until there are solar planes or something, eliminate the carbon impact. So we're thinking hard about offsetting, for example. So that's maybe not the answer people want to hear or that they were expecting. For me, I don't want to stop travel. I want to stop the negative consequences of travel. But we could debate, we're out of time, we could debate later maybe.
Yeah. Okay, good. So, Caroline or Alex, is there anything you would like to say in response to either that or the other questions about how we value and price cycling or the infrastructure?
Okay. In terms of the question about changing hearts and minds at Edinburgh College, I'm going to have to try and watch my words, because although I am external to Edinburgh College, I still work there, in the building, I mean. I think that the college sees sustainability, it sees it more or less as a tick boxing exercise. They have a sustainability coordinator, and he basically just kind of reports on it, does reporting in a few small things here and there. There's nothing at all like SRS. It's one man compared to, what, 50 or more?
I wish 25.
Okay, 25. So it really, and any projects which the college is running, so I work at the project I work at, for example, is funded by external funding. It's funded by the Climate Challenge Fund. We have a cycling officer who's funded by Transport Scotland via Cycling Scotland. So it's all kind of external funding pots, but that's because the college, being a further education college, is subject to extreme financial difficulties. There isn't a lot of money in further education at all. So it's definitely part of a wider picture, and so you can understand why the college sees sustainability as a smaller issue. Although that being said, the sustainability committee at the college, everyone pretty much, as far as I'm aware, on that committee is a man who drives to work, apart from the sustainability coordinator who gets the train. So yeah, changing hearts and minds. There is obviously like a travel and tourism courses that the college teaches. They do like air hostessing courses and things. I don't know a huge amount about in terms of sustainability within that course, but I'd be very interested to look into it.
So there were so many questions there. In terms of how we value cycling, I can't go into deep detail, but in Friends of the Earth Scotland, we wanted to change the policy to enable staff to reclaim a higher cost for expenses for cycling. And our office manager actually found that if we did it too far, that could be a taxable benefit. So there were limitations within the system to how much we were able to increase that to enable people to recover the cost of tyre wear, changing your brakes, whatever. So yeah, it's bizarre that that's really not reflected in the system, and I don't know the answer to how to fix it. But as always, just talk about it, shout about it. I think your point also about MSPs, and you would love to see your MSPs kind of arriving to discuss this stuff by bike. You can invite them, spokes can invite them. You can say, hey, you're discussing this thing. We have arranged for you, say there's 7 MSPs on the committee, we've arranged 7 e-bikes for you. Come and cycle around with us. Come and see some of the challenges, discuss it. Invite them to your local project. This is within your power. Invite them to do this stuff. Get them out to understand the barriers, to understand the challenges. And I think one of the real problems is that the MSPs who are in Parliament discussing this, many of them reflect the demographics of the car drivers. So there are a lot of older men, they're pretty well off. It's actually free to park in the Parliament. So they're exactly the kind of people that we need to be influencing, that we need to be targeting, that we need to be talking to. 43% of Scotland's transport emissions come from car use. And we already saw that 37% of our emissions are from transport. So that's a huge chunk of Scotland's overall climate emissions are coming from individual car use. Do I think, in response to your question, that we can tackle this? I mean, I'm a climate change campaigner. I have to have hope that we can change things in the face of what seems inevitable crisis. I think change is absolutely possible, but I know that it needs all of us to stand up collectively and push for that change. So whatever it is that we want to see happen, yes, it can happen, but it's up to all of us to make that happen.
Nice. That's excellent. I'm afraid I'm going to give them one last word if they want it, but we have to close. But one thing that's really struck me is how just darn complicated these issues are. And when you unpick one bit, you don't even realize what you've unleashed on the other in terms of ethics and morals. But also, as we've just heard from Caroline, how that has advantages as well, because it also means that a small move, an individual move, one more person getting on a bicycle, is the way to make that contribution into something larger than it is. So I've been asked by the organizers whether I would, and we have to get out in 1 minute, which is why I was so rude, so sorry. But I was asked if I could ask you if you could imagine one takeaway point. And Caroline, you gave a great one already, and you can top that if you want or leave it. But what should we all, as we jump on as we cycle home this evening, what should be our one takeaway?
I would definitely echo what Caroline just said about actually taking action and getting involved. And so my personal takeaway is to do more practicing what I preach. My role as a volunteer is to encourage young people to engage in policy, and that takes up some time, so often I don't get a chance to write to my MSP myself. So that's my own takeaway.
I used to do futures for a living, thinking about the future and how change happens. change is happening. We have revolutionized the industry, the energy industry already. We're about to revolutionize with electric vehicles. We're about to revolutionize with big data. Young people's diets and their thinking about agriculture is going to transform agriculture over the next. We can make change, so we need to have a certain tenacity and not lose hope. Those of us who've been at it for a long time, and those of us trying for the first time and finding barriers, we can make change. We've made lots of positive changes to society, so we need to just keep going and not lose hope.
So I would say it would be to take your action beyond the individual and into the political campaign, get organised, join a group. It's super sociable and fun as well as just helping to change things. But yeah, get organised, get political, get active, make change.
All right.